What if the most dangerous questions are not the ones without answers, but the ones whose answers slowly destroy your sense of reality? Every human mind carries certain thoughts it avoids, questions that appear harmless at first, simple, almost philosophical. But the longer you sit with them, the stranger they become, and eventually, something unsettling begins to happen. The question stops feeling like an idea and starts feeling like a crack in reality itself. Tonight, you will enter those cracks. You will explore questions that become heavier the longer they remain in your mind. Questions about identity, memory, existence, control, consciousness, and the terrifying possibility that much of what feels real may only exist because your mind insists that it does. Some of these questions may disturb you. Some may quietly follow you after the video ends, and some may feel impossible to escape once they fully enter your awareness. So dim the lights, slow your thoughts, and step carefully into the questions your mind was never meant to hold. Question that exists before thought. Before you learned language, before you understood who you were, before you even recognized your own reflection, something inside you was already searching. A newborn child cannot speak. It cannot explain fear, identity, loneliness, or meaning. And yet, from the very beginning, the mind reaches outward as if it is trying to understand something it cannot remember. Why? Why does consciousness arrive already searching for answers? This becomes disturbing when you realize that questions may not come from knowledge. They may come from absence, from something missing deep inside awareness itself. Think about it carefully. Every question you have ever asked began with a feeling before it became words. Long before language forms, the mind experiences confusion, curiosity, uncertainty, a strange pressure to understand reality. It is almost as if consciousness itself is incomplete. And perhaps that is what thought truly is. Not intelligence, not wisdom, but a wound trying to close itself. The unsettling part is that some questions feel older than your personality, older than your memories. Sometimes you experience a strange moment late at night where a thought enters your mind that feels ancient, a question you cannot fully explain. What is all of this? Why am I here? What is awareness itself? These questions do not feel invented, they feel discovered, as though they were already waiting inside you. And the more you think about that, the stranger it becomes. Because where would such questions come from? Human beings are taught that consciousness develops slowly through experience. But certain fears and questions seem to exist before experience can explain them. Even children sometimes stare into space and ask questions that sound impossibly deep for their age. What happens before life? Where was I before I was born? Will I disappear forever? These are not ordinary curiosities. They feel primal, almost built into awareness itself, as though the mind arrives carrying hidden questions it does not fully understand. But here is where the paradox becomes deeply uncomfortable. If some questions exist before thought, then thought may not create questions at all. It may only reveal them. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine consciousness as a dark room filled with invisible shapes. Thoughts are not creating those shapes. They are simply illuminating them one at a time. That would mean the deepest fears in your mind were always there, waiting, silent, watching beneath the surface of your awareness. And maybe that explains why certain questions disturb people so deeply, not because the questions are difficult, but because they awaken something ancient already buried inside the mind. You can feel this happening sometimes. A thought enters your awareness unexpectedly. At first it seems small, but once noticed, it begins expanding. Your mind keeps returning to it against your will. What if my entire personality is temporary? What if consciousness never truly ends? What if I have mistaken familiarity for truth my entire life? The disturbing part is not the lack of answers. It is the feeling that the questions themselves are alive, that they pull attention toward them. And perhaps the strangest example of this is the question of existence itself. Most people spend years accepting reality without examining it. They wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat, but eventually, usually in silence or exhaustion, something strange happens. The mind pauses. And suddenly the most terrifyingly simple question appears. Why does anything exist at all? Not how, why? Why is there something instead of nothing? The longer you think about this question, the more unstable reality begins to feel, because every answer creates another question behind it. If the universe began, what existed before it? If something created existence, what created that thing? If existence always existed, how is that even possible? Eventually the mind reaches a wall where logic begins collapsing into confusion. And perhaps that is why humans distract themselves constantly. Noise protects the mind from questions that become too large to hold comfortably. But silence removes protection. In silence, the old questions return. Questions that may have existed long before words, long before identity, long before the version of you that now believes itself to be a person. And then another disturbing possibility appears. What if consciousness itself is the question? Not the answer, not the observer, but the question reality is trying to ask. That would explain why humans constantly search for meaning, yet never fully find it. Why every answer eventually feels incomplete. Why certainty never lasts long before doubt quietly returns. Maybe awareness was never built to arrive at permanent conclusions. Maybe awareness exists to continue questioning forever. And if that is true, then thought itself becomes unsettling, because the mind is not simply solving reality. It is endlessly unfolding deeper layers of confusion hidden beneath temporary understanding. The more humans learn about existence, the stranger existence becomes. Science answers one mystery, only to uncover 10 more beneath it. Psychology explains behavior while deepening the mystery of consciousness itself. Philosophy builds systems of meaning that eventually collapse under newer questions. It never ends, because perhaps questioning is not a malfunction of consciousness. Perhaps it is consciousness in its purest form, a process endlessly reaching toward something it cannot fully grasp. And maybe that is why certain moments feel so unsettling late at night. Moments where you suddenly become aware of awareness itself. Moments where your own thoughts begin feeling unfamiliar. Moments where existence no longer feels automatic, but deeply strange. In those moments, the oldest question begins surfacing again. not in words, not in language, but as a sensation beneath thought itself, a feeling that something about existence remains unresolved, something vast, something impossible to fully explain. And perhaps that feeling has always been there, long before language gave it a voice, long before memory shaped your identity, long before you became the person listening to these words now. Maybe the first thing consciousness ever experiences is the question it spends eternity trying to answer that creates more fear. Most people believe fear comes from uncertainty. They think the mind suffers because it does not know enough, because reality contains mysteries, gaps, and unanswered questions. And so humans spend their lives searching for answers, believing knowledge will finally bring peace. But some answers do the opposite. Some answers are far more terrifying than the questions that created them, because uncertainty at least allows hope. An answer removes it. Think about how comforting mystery can sometimes be. When you do not know the outcome of something, the mind still imagines possibilities, some good, some bad. Uncertainty leaves space for escape, but an answer closes the door. And once certain ideas become clear enough, the mind can never fully return to the comfort it had before. This is why some truths feel dangerous, not because they are false, but because they permanently change the way reality feels once understood. A child eventually learns that every living thing dies. At first, this sounds like ordinary knowledge, simple biology, but the longer the mind sits with it, the stranger it becomes. Everyone dies. Every voice disappears. Every memory fades. Every person you love is temporary. And suddenly the answer becomes heavier than the question ever was. Because before understanding death, the child lived inside unconscious immortality. Reality felt endless, safe, stable. Then one answer quietly destroys that illusion forever, and this pattern repeats throughout life. The human mind constantly searches for certainty, yet certainty often becomes the source of deeper fear. Take the idea of identity. Many people spend years asking themselves who they truly are. They search for purpose, personality, meaning. They want a stable answer that explains the self completely. But eventually psychology reveals something disturbing. Personality changes constantly. Memories are unreliable. Emotions manipulate perception. Even the sense of self can fracture under enough pressure. And suddenly the answer becomes terrifying. There may not be a permanent you at all, only patterns temporarily holding themselves together long enough to feel continuous. At first this sounds philosophical, abstract, but late at night, when the mind grows quiet, it begins to feel deeply personal. Because if identity is unstable, then who exactly has been living your life this entire time? The disturbing part is that answers often remove comforting illusions humans depend on emotionally. People want truth, but only truth that allows the world to remain emotionally survivable. When truth threatens stability, the mind resists it. This is why humans distract themselves so often. Endless noise, endless stimulation, endless routines. Not because people hate thinking, but because some conclusions become too heavy to carry comfortably. And perhaps no answer is more unsettling than the possibility that consciousness itself is alone. Every human being experiences reality privately. No one can directly enter another mind. No one can truly verify another person experiences awareness exactly as they do. You assume others are conscious because they behave like you, but you cannot prove it. The more you think about this, the stranger the world becomes. Everyone around you could possess inner lives as vivid as yours, or consciousness itself could be something radically different than it appears. And suddenly another terrifying possibility emerges. What if you are the only awareness you can ever truly know exists? This question disturbs people because it attacks the emotional structure of reality itself. Humans survive psychologically through shared experience, through connection, through the feeling that existence is collectively real. But certain answers isolate the mind. They force awareness inward, and isolation amplifies fear. Sometimes answers become frightening because they reveal how little control humans actually possess. For centuries, people believed they freely chose their thoughts and actions completely. But neuroscience increasingly suggests many decisions begin unconsciously before awareness notices them. The brain acts first. Consciousness becomes aware afterward. If this is true, then free will may feel more real than it actually is, and suddenly the answer becomes deeply uncomfortable. What if the feeling of control is partially an illusion created after decisions already begin forming beneath awareness? That thought lingers because it changes ordinary life completely. Every choice, every regret, every moral judgment, every feeling of responsibility, all begin feeling unstable. And the mind does not enjoy instability. The mind craves certainty, because certainty creates emotional safety, but reality repeatedly destroys certainty. That may be why human beings cling so tightly to beliefs, identities, ideologies, and routines. Stable structures protect consciousness from collapsing into endless existential confusion. Yet answers continue eroding those structures anyway, and perhaps the most disturbing answers are the ones that reveal there may never be final answers at all. Imagine searching your entire life for ultimate meaning, only to realize existence may not contain one in the way humans expect. No hidden explanation, no final resolution, no complete understanding waiting at the end. Just awareness existing briefly inside an incomprehensibly vast universe. For some people, this thought creates freedom. For others, terror. Because humans are meaning-making creatures, the mind naturally searches for narrative, direction, purpose. Without those things, existence begins feeling uncertain in a deeper way. Not dangerous, just empty. And emptiness frightens the mind almost more than pain itself. But strangely, humans continue searching for answers anyway, even when answers disturb them, even when certainty destroys comfort, even when truth creates more fear than ignorance ever did. Why? Perhaps because consciousness cannot stop moving toward understanding, even when understanding hurts. Maybe the human mind would rather suffer inside truth than rest peacefully inside illusion. Or perhaps something even stranger is happening. Maybe fear itself is evidence that the answer matters. After all, the mind rarely fears things that feel meaningless. The deepest fear comes from ideas that feel important enough to threaten your understanding of reality. And maybe that is why some thoughts stay with you long after hearing them. Not because they are unresolved, but because part of you suspects they may already be true. So the mind keeps returning to them, examining them, testing them against reality again and again, trying desperately to find a way back to comfort. But certain answers change the structure of thought permanently once seen clearly enough. And the longer you sit with them, the more fear quietly begins replacing certainty. Memory that cannot be trusted. Most people believe memory works like a recording, a private archive hidden somewhere inside the mind where experiences are stored exactly as they happened. You live a moment, the brain saves it, and later you replay it when needed. Simple, stable, reliable. But memory does not work that way at all. And the longer you think about this, the more disturbing your entire identity begins to feel. Because your personality, your relationships, your regrets, your beliefs, and even your sense of self are all built upon memories you assume are true. What happens if they are not? Psychologists have discovered something deeply unsettling about the human mind. Every time you remember something, you do not simply retrieve the memory. You rebuild it again and again. And during that reconstruction, details change, emotions reshape events. New experiences alter old interpretations. Missing pieces get filled automatically by the brain itself, meaning your memories are not frozen records of reality. They are living stories constantly rewritten without your awareness. Think about how frightening that really is. The person you believe you were 5 years ago may partly be a creation of your current mind. The past feels fixed, but psychologically it behaves more like soft clay than stone. And yet humans trust memory completely. You wake up each day believing continuity exists because your memories create the illusion of a stable personal history. They connect yesterday's version of you to today's version. Without memory, identity begins collapsing immediately. That is what makes this question so disturbing. If memory can change, then how much of you has changed with it? You can already feel evidence of this inside your own mind. Sometimes two people remember the same moment completely differently. Both feel absolutely certain, both emotionally believe their version is correct. Yet the memories conflict. Who is right? Perhaps neither. Perhaps the event itself no longer exists in its original form inside either mind. Only interpretations remain, and interpretations are fragile things. This becomes even stranger when you realize false memories can be implanted into people surprisingly easily. Experiments have shown that humans can become emotionally attached to events that never happened at all. Entire childhood moments can be partially manufactured through suggestion, repetition, and imagination. The terrifying part is not that memory fails sometimes. It is that the mind usually cannot tell the difference between real memories and altered ones. Confidence means nothing. You can feel absolutely certain and still be wrong. That idea quietly destroys one of the deepest assumptions humans rely on psychologically, the belief that personal experience equals truth. Because if your memories are unstable, then your understanding of reality becomes unstable too. Imagine discovering that one important memory from your life never happened the way you remember it. Maybe a painful betrayal, maybe a childhood fear, maybe a moment that shaped your entire personality. Now imagine that memory was incomplete, distorted, or entirely false. Would you still be the same person afterward? Or would part of your identity disappear with the memory itself? This is where the question becomes existential. Humans think identity comes from the body, or personality, or consciousness, but much of what you call yourself is actually narrative, a story stitched together through remembered experiences. Memory creates continuity. It tells you where you came from, who hurt you, who loved you, what matters, what to fear. Without memory, the self becomes unstable almost instantly. And perhaps that is why memory errors feel so emotionally disturbing. When memory breaks, reality itself feels less solid. You may have experienced this before, a moment where you suddenly question whether something truly happened the way you remember it. A conversation feels different. A place feels unfamiliar. A childhood event becomes blurry and uncertain. For a second, your confidence in reality weakens, and the mind hates that feeling. Because memory is not only how humans remember the past, it is how they protect themselves from psychological chaos. Memory creates the comforting illusion that life has structure, that your story moves consistently from one moment to the next. But if memory constantly rewrites itself, then perhaps the story is changing while you live inside it, and maybe it always has been. Some neuroscientists describe memory less like storage and more like reconstruction. The brain saves fragments, emotional impressions, patterns. Later, consciousness rebuilds the rest automatically. In other words, much of what feels like recollection may actually be intelligent imagination. That thought becomes deeply unsettling late at night, because if memory partly relies on imagination, then the line between reality and fiction inside your own mind becomes difficult to locate precisely. And then an even stranger question appears. What if forgetting is not a flaw? What if forgetting is necessary? Imagine remembering every detail of your life permanently, every embarrassment, every grief, every fear, every painful moment existing with perfect clarity forever. The mind would collapse beneath the weight of total memory. Forgetting protects consciousness. It allows emotional wounds to soften. It allows identity to evolve. It allows the mind to survive. But protection comes at a cost. To remain psychologically stable, humans sacrifice certainty about the past. And perhaps that means no one truly knows their own history completely, not even you. This becomes terrifying when applied to emotional pain. Many fears, insecurities, and behaviors originate from memories formed early in life. But what if those memories are distorted? What if the emotional conclusions you built around them were incomplete? A single misunderstood experience could silently shape decades of behavior, and you might never realize it. Humans often imagine the past as something safely behind them, but psychologically, the past remains alive inside memory, constantly rewriting itself beneath awareness. You are not simply remembering your life, you are continuously recreating it, even now. And maybe that explains why people change over time. Not only because new experiences happen, but because old experiences slowly transform too. The mind revisits memories repeatedly, each time altering them slightly through emotion, reflection, fear, desire, and time. Eventually, the original event may vanish completely beneath layers of reconstruction, yet the emotional impact remains, a ghost without a clear source. And perhaps the most disturbing realization of all is this: you will never know which memories inside your mind are perfectly true, never completely. Not because you are unintelligent, but because consciousness itself reconstructs reality imperfectly by nature. Your entire sense of self rests upon unstable foundations, constantly shifting beneath awareness. Still, humans continue trusting memory anyway, because without it, identity dissolves into confusion. And maybe that is the final paradox. The mind depends on memory to create reality, even while memory quietly changes reality from within. Voice inside your mind that you never chose. There is a voice speaking inside your mind right now, not out loud, not through sound, but through thought itself. It comments on your life constantly. It judges, explains, worries, predicts, remembers, imagines. It speaks when you are alone. It speaks when you are afraid. It even speaks while you silently read these words. Most people assume that voice is them, but the longer you examine it, the stranger that assumption becomes, because you never consciously chose that voice. You never selected its tone, its fears, its language, or the way it reacts to the world. It simply appeared one day and began narrating your existence as though it had always belonged there. And perhaps the most disturbing part is this: you do not fully control what it says. Thoughts arrive automatically. A memory appears without permission. A fear interrupts silence. A sentence forms in your head before you intentionally create it. Even now, if you try to predict your very next thought exactly before it appears, something strange happens. You cannot. The thought simply arrives, which raises an uncomfortable question. If you are creating the voice in your mind, why can you not fully control it? Humans rarely examine this deeply because the inner voice feels familiar. Constant exposure creates the illusion of ownership, but familiarity is not proof of authorship. Your heartbeat feels familiar too. You still do not consciously create it. The voice inside the mind behaves similarly. Most of the time, it runs automatically beneath awareness. It reacts before you decide to react. It generates interpretations before you consciously analyze situations. And sometimes, it says things you do not even agree with. Cruel thoughts, embarrassing thoughts, violent thoughts, fearful thoughts, random thoughts so strange they make you uncomfortable simply for having them. Where do those thoughts come from? This question becomes deeply unsettling because humans build identity around thought. People believe they are the thinker behind the voice, but if thoughts emerge automatically, then the relationship between consciousness and thought becomes unclear. Maybe you are not the creator of thought. Maybe you are the observer of thought, and those are very different things. You can experience this directly during moments of anxiety. The mind begins producing fearful scenarios automatically, often against your will. You try to stop thinking negatively, yet the thoughts continue arriving anyway. If you truly controlled the voice completely, you could silence it instantly, but most people cannot. Instead, they negotiate with it, resist it, distract themselves from it, argue against it internally, as though the mind contains two separate forces, the voice that speaks and the awareness forced to listen. The longer you sit with this possibility, the stranger ordinary life becomes, because nearly every human experience depends on internal narration. Memory becomes language. Identity becomes language. Emotional suffering becomes language repeated endlessly inside the mind. The inner voice shapes reality more than the external world itself. Two people can live through the same event and experience entirely different emotional realities simply because their inner voices interpret the event differently. One mind says, "This failure proves I am worthless." Another says, "This pain will eventually pass." The external situation may remain identical, yet the internal narration changes everything. That means much of reality is psychologically constructed through a voice you never consciously chose to have. And perhaps even stranger, that voice was built partly by other people. Think carefully about the language inside your own mind. Many phrases, fears, insecurities, and reactions were learned from parents, teachers, culture, media, childhood experiences, emotional wounds. In a sense, fragments of other people now speak through your thoughts every day. A parent's criticism becomes your self-doubt. A society's fear becomes your anxiety. An old humiliation becomes your inner caution. Over time, these voices merge together until they feel personal. But are they? Or has the mind slowly become an echo chamber of absorbed influences, pretending to be a unified self? This possibility becomes terrifying because humans desperately want to feel internally authentic. People want to believe their thoughts belong to them completely. But much of mental life may simply be conditioning repeating itself automatically. And then another unsettling question appears. If the inner voice is not fully you, then who exactly is listening to it? Notice something strange. You can observe your thoughts. You can notice the voice speaking. You can even disagree with it, which means there must be some level of awareness separate from the voice itself. Otherwise, observation would be impossible. This realization creates a deeply eerie sensation for many people. The moment awareness notices thought clearly, the mind briefly feels divided. There is the voice, and there is the observer silently watching the voice. For a second, identity becomes unstable, because if you can observe thought, then perhaps thought is not your deepest self after all. Meditation traditions explored this idea for thousands of years. They noticed that the inner voice never fully stops. Even in silence, the mind continues producing commentary automatically. But beneath that activity exists something quieter, simple awareness itself. The unsettling part is how unfamiliar this awareness can feel when finally noticed. Most people spend their entire lives fused completely with the voice in their heads. They assume every thought reflects truth, identity, or intention. But thoughts are often chaotic, contradictory, temporary. The voice says one thing today and another tomorrow. It changes with mood, fear, exhaustion, hormones, loneliness, desire, and yet humans build entire identities around it anyway, perhaps because uncertainty feels frightening. Without the voice constantly narrating reality, the sense of self begins dissolving into something far less defined, and humans fear emptiness. That may explain why silence can feel uncomfortable. Many people cannot sit quietly without immediately reaching for stimulation. Music, videos, conversation, noise, because in silence, the inner voice becomes louder, and eventually, another disturbing realization emerges. You are not always choosing your thoughts, but your thoughts are constantly shaping you. Every repeated internal sentence strengthens emotional patterns. Every fear rehearsed mentally becomes more believable. Every identity repeated internally feels more real over time. The voice builds psychological reality gradually, one thought at a time, and perhaps that is why humans become trapped inside certain mental loops for years. Not because the world itself traps them, but because the voice inside the mind keeps repeating the same reality until it feels permanent. Still, there is something even stranger hidden beneath all of this. Sometimes the inner voice suddenly disappears for a brief moment, during shock, during awe, during deep focus, during overwhelming beauty, and in those rare moments, awareness remains fully alive even without internal narration. Reality simply exists directly, no commentary, no explanation, just experience itself, which may reveal the final disturbing truth. The voice inside your mind is not consciousness. It is only the story consciousness keeps telling itself, so it does not have to face the silence underneath. Silence that feels like someone watching. There is a certain kind of silence that feels wrong. Not peaceful, not calm, but heavy. A silence so complete that it begins to feel alive somehow, as if the absence of sound is not empty at all, but filled with something invisible quietly waiting beyond perception. Most people have experienced this at least once, late at night, alone in a dark room, walking through an empty hallway, sitting awake while the entire world seems asleep. Nothing happens, nothing moves, and yet a strange feeling slowly begins crawling through the mind, the feeling that you are not alone. This sensation is deeply unsettling because it appears without evidence, no voice, no figure, no proof, just awareness itself suddenly becoming uncomfortable inside silence. Why? Why does the human mind sometimes interpret silence as presence? Evolution offers one explanation. Ancient humans survived by detecting danger quickly, a mind capable of sensing threats before fully confirming them had a better chance of survival. Better to falsely imagine danger than ignore something real. But that explanation only partly resolves the mystery, because the feeling often goes beyond ordinary fear. Sometimes silence does not merely feel dangerous, it feels aware, as though reality itself has begun staring back. And the longer you sit with that feeling, the stranger consciousness becomes. Think about what normally protects the human mind from existential discomfort. Constant stimulation, sound, movement, conversation, information. Noise fills awareness endlessly, preventing the mind from fully confronting itself. But silence removes distractions, and once distractions disappear, the mind begins turning inward. That is when strange things emerge. Thoughts feel louder, time feels slower. Ordinary surroundings begin feeling unfamiliar. Even your own awareness starts becoming noticeable in an uncomfortable way. You suddenly realize you are experiencing existence directly, with nothing buffering you from it. And perhaps that is what truly frightens people, not silence itself, but exposure. Because silence strips reality down to its rawest form. No entertainment, no emotional escape, no constant reassurance from the external world, just awareness alone with itself. The unsettling part is that humans are rarely prepared for this. Most people spend their entire lives surrounded by stimulation. The mind becomes dependent on noise because noise protects identity from dissolving into deeper questions. Silence removes that protection, and in silence, the mind starts noticing things it normally avoids: the fragility of identity, the uncertainty of existence, the strange fact that consciousness is happening at all. This is why certain moments of silence feel almost supernatural, not because something paranormal is present, but because awareness suddenly loses its ordinary distractions and becomes hyper-aware of itself. That hyper-awareness can become terrifying. Imagine lying awake at 3 a.m. with no sound around you. Eventually, the mind begins searching for patterns automatically. Every tiny movement feels significant. Every shadow feels uncertain. Your own heartbeat becomes noticeable. And then a strange psychological shift happens. Instead of feeling like the observer of the room, you begin feeling observed by it. That reversal creates deep fear because humans are comfortable watching reality, but deeply uncomfortable feeling watched by reality itself. It challenges the invisible assumption that consciousness exists safely hidden behind the eyes, separated from the world. Silence weakens that illusion, and perhaps this explains why humans historically filled silence with stories, spirits, gods, demons, invisible beings. Ancient cultures often interpreted silence as occupied space rather than emptiness, because psychologically, total emptiness feels unnatural to the human mind. The brain expects movement, sound, stimulation. When those disappear completely, awareness begins generating presence automatically. But there may be something even stranger happening beneath this. Silence does not merely remove sound, it removes distraction from existence itself, and existence, when experienced directly for too long, begins feeling profoundly mysterious. Most humans move through life unconsciously. Routine protects the mind from confronting reality too deeply. Wake up, work, speak, scroll, sleep, repeat. But silence interrupts routine. It forces awareness to pause, and in that pause, something uncomfortable appears. The realization that consciousness itself is strange beyond explanation. You are a mind floating inside an incomprehensibly vast universe, temporarily aware of itself for reasons you do not fully understand. Normally, this realization stays buried beneath daily life. Silence uncovers it. That is why some people avoid silence instinctively. They leave televisions running while sleeping. They play music constantly. They surround themselves with endless information, because noise creates psychological distance from existential awareness. Silence removes distance, and once reality feels too immediate, the mind starts searching desperately for familiar structure again. But sometimes the feeling deepens further. Sometimes silence begins feeling intelligent somehow. Not literally conscious perhaps, but uncannily responsive. as though awareness itself has become exposed to something larger than ordinary thought. People describe this sensation differently. Some call it spiritual, some call it paranoia, some call it existential dread. Yet the core experience remains remarkably similar, the disturbing sense that when all external noise disappears, something unknown becomes visible beneath reality. Maybe not externally, maybe internally. And perhaps that distinction no longer feels clear in deep silence. The mind itself behaves differently there. Time stretches strangely. Thoughts echo louder. Identity loosens slightly. Ordinary boundaries between self and environment begin feeling less stable. This is why prolonged isolation can profoundly affect human psychology. Without external stimulation, awareness starts feeding on itself. Thoughts become amplified. Emotions intensify. Silence turns inward until the mind becomes both observer and observed simultaneously. And maybe that is the final disturbing truth hidden inside certain moments of silence. The feeling of someone watching may not come from outside you at all. It may come from becoming aware of awareness itself. Usually, consciousness points outward toward the world, but in silence, consciousness sometimes turns inward and notices its own existence directly, and that experience feels deeply unfamiliar. Because suddenly there is no distraction between you and the fact that you are conscious. No barrier, no noise, no escape. Just awareness staring directly at itself through the silence. And perhaps that is why certain silences feel unbearable the longer they continue. Not because something is hiding in the darkness, but because eventually, in complete silence, the only thing left to encounter is your own existence. Choice that may never have been yours. Every day, you make choices without thinking twice about them. You choose what to say, what to eat, who to love, what to believe. You feel yourself deciding constantly, as though an invisible you sits somewhere inside the mind, carefully directing your life moment by moment. This feeling is so natural that most people never question it. But the longer you examine choice itself, the stranger it becomes. Because modern neuroscience has uncovered something deeply unsettling. Your brain often begins making decisions before you become consciously aware of choosing anything at all. Experiments measuring brain activity have shown that tiny unconscious signals appear moments before a person consciously feels they have made a decision. The brain moves first. Awareness notices afterward. At first, this sounds insignificant, just a scientific detail, but if you sit with it long enough, the implications become deeply disturbing. Because it suggests the feeling of choice may partly be a story consciousness tells itself after decisions have already begun forming beneath awareness, and suddenly a terrifying possibility emerges. What if the person you believe is controlling your life is not fully in control at all? Think about your own thoughts for a moment. Did you choose your next thought before it appeared? Did you consciously create your emotions before feeling them? Can you decide, right now, exactly what you will desire tomorrow? Most mental activity arrives automatically. Thoughts emerge, feelings emerge, impulses emerge. Awareness experiences them after they appear. And yet humans still feel like independent decision makers standing at the center of consciousness. Why? Perhaps because the illusion of control is psychologically necessary. Without it, reality becomes frighteningly unstable. Imagine fully accepting that every choice you make might result from countless hidden forces outside your awareness: genetics, childhood experiences, trauma, hormones, culture, environment, random neurological activity, all shaping decisions before you ever notice them. Suddenly, identity itself begins feeling less solid, because if your choices are heavily determined by causes you did not choose, then what exactly is the self? The disturbing part is that humans define themselves largely through decisions. People believe they are responsible for their achievements, failures, morality, relationships, and future because they assume they consciously direct their behavior. But what if consciousness is less like a commander and more like a witness observing decisions unfold? That possibility unsettles the mind immediately because humans desperately need agency. Agency creates meaning, it creates responsibility, it creates purpose. Without choice, life begins feeling mechanical, and perhaps even stranger. The feeling of choosing may itself be unavoidable, even if control is limited. You cannot simply stop experiencing yourself as a decision maker. The sensation feels built directly into awareness. Even while questioning free will, the mind continues feeling as though it is deciding what to think next. This creates a paradox. You may not fully control your thoughts, but you still experience yourself as the thinker. You may not fully create your desires, but you still experience yourself wanting things intensely. The mind cannot escape the feeling of authorship. Even while evidence suggests authorship may be partly constructed after the fact, this becomes deeply eerie during moments of regret. People often replay past choices endlessly. I should have done something different, if only I had known. But what if you could not have chosen differently in that exact moment, with that exact brain, history, emotional state, and information available to you? Would regret still make sense? Or would it transform into something stranger? A realization that life may unfold through chains of causes too complex for consciousness to fully control. The longer you think about this, the more ordinary behavior begins feeling mysterious. Why do certain people become kind while others become cruel? Why does one person resist temptation while another collapses into addiction? Why do some minds naturally move toward hope while others drift toward despair? People often assume these outcomes reflect purely personal choice. But beneath every action exists an invisible network of influences stretching backward through biology, memory, environment, and time itself. Even your preferences may not truly belong to you. You did not choose the music that emotionally moves you. You did not choose what faces you find attractive. You did not choose your deepest fears. They appeared. And from those hidden foundations, countless decisions begin forming automatically. This realization can feel suffocating at first, because if free will weakens, morality becomes confusing. Praise becomes confusing, blame becomes confusing. Identity itself starts losing its sharp edges. But there is another side to this paradox. Perhaps humans misunderstand what freedom actually means. Maybe freedom was never absolute control over every thought and action. Maybe true freedom exists within awareness itself, the ability to notice impulses without immediately becoming them. A person may not choose every thought that appears, but they may influence which thoughts they continue feeding. Not perfect control, but participation. And perhaps that subtle distinction matters deeply. Still, the unsettling feeling remains, because even your attempts to resist certain thoughts may arise from causes you never chose. It becomes an endless loop. Every explanation creates another question behind it. Did you choose your personality? No. Did you choose the experiences shaping your personality? Mostly no. Did you choose the brain interpreting those experiences? No. Then where exactly does the independent self begin? The mind struggles with this question because humans instinctively feel separate from causality. People feel like individuals standing outside the machinery of existence, directing their lives intentionally. But perhaps consciousness is not outside reality at all. Perhaps it is one process inside a much larger unfolding system, a wave believing it controls the ocean. And maybe this is why some decisions feel strangely inevitable afterward. Certain relationships, certain mistakes, certain turning points in life feel, in retrospect, as though they were always going to happen somehow. Not because fate exists necessarily, but because countless invisible conditions quietly guided them into existence long before awareness noticed. Even now, while reading these words, thoughts are forming automatically inside your mind. Emotional reactions arise before conscious analysis finishes. Agreement, resistance, curiosity, discomfort. Did you choose those reactions completely, or did they simply appear? The more honestly you observe your own mind, the harder the question becomes. And perhaps that is the most disturbing realization of all. The feeling of control may itself be part of the experience consciousness creates, not proof that control exists in the way humans imagine. Still, life continues. People keep choosing, keep loving, keep regretting, keep deciding. Because whether free will is fully real or partly illusion, consciousness remains trapped inside the feeling of being a self moving through time. And maybe that feeling is powerful enough to shape reality anyway. Or maybe the final choice you never truly made was becoming the person you are now. Face you show that is not really you. Every person you know is interacting with a version of you that is not entirely real. A constructed version, a controlled version, a face carefully shaped through years of fear, expectation, survival, and social conditioning. And perhaps the strangest part is that most people no longer know where the performance ends and the real self begins. From childhood, humans learn an invisible lesson very quickly. Certain parts of you are acceptable, others are not. You learn which emotions make people uncomfortable, which thoughts should remain hidden, which behaviors receive love, approval, rejection, or punishment. And slowly, without realizing it, the mind begins building masks. One for family, one for strangers, one for work, one for love, one for loneliness. At first, these masks feel temporary, simple social adjustments. But over time, something unsettling happens. The performance becomes automatic. You stop consciously choosing the face you show the world because the role fuses with identity itself. And eventually, another disturbing question appears. If you perform long enough, what remains underneath? Most people assume personality is stable and authentic, but psychology suggests much of human behavior is adaptive. People unconsciously modify themselves constantly depending on who is watching. Your voice changes, your opinions soften or sharpen, your humor shifts. Even your body language transforms depending on the environment. This happens so naturally that humans rarely notice it, but if the self changes continuously based on observation, then perhaps identity is far more fluid than it appears. You can feel this directly in certain moments. Sometimes you are alone and suddenly realize the version of yourself that exists privately feels completely different from the person others know. Different thoughts, different fears, different desires, different emotional truths. And for a brief second, an uncomfortable realization emerges. Almost nobody truly knows you completely. Maybe nobody can, because the mind itself carefully hides parts of identity, even from conscious awareness. This is what makes social existence psychologically exhausting. Humans are constantly managing perception, constantly adjusting behavior to maintain emotional safety, belonging, status, or approval. People say, "I'm fine, I don't care, I'm confident." Even while feeling the opposite internally, the face shown outward becomes armor, and armor eventually grows heavy. But humans continue wearing it because exposure feels dangerous. To be fully seen is terrifying, because real authenticity risks rejection. If people saw every insecurity, every fear, every strange thought hidden beneath the surface, would they still love you the same way? Most people are not certain, and uncertainty creates performance. The disturbing part is that many identities are built almost entirely around external expectations. Some people spend so many years becoming what others need that they lose contact with what they genuinely feel. The obedient child, the strong parent, the successful worker, the funny friend, the calm partner. Roles slowly replace reality. And perhaps that is why silence alone can feel so uncomfortable for certain people. Without external observers, the performed identity weakens. The mind suddenly loses the structure it normally uses to define itself. Then another question begins surfacing quietly. Who am I when nobody is watching? This question feels simple at first, but the longer you sit with it, the more difficult it becomes to answer honestly. Because much of human identity exists relationally. People define themselves through reactions, conversations, validation, comparison, memory, and social roles. Without reflection from others, the self becomes harder to locate clearly. In some sense, identity behaves like a mirror phenomenon. Parts of you only appear because other people exist to reflect them back. And perhaps that explains why loneliness can become existential rather than merely emotional. Extended isolation sometimes causes people to feel unreal. Without enough social interaction, identity begins losing definition. The self weakens without constant reinforcement from others. That realization becomes deeply unsettling, because it suggests personality may not be a fixed object hidden inside you. It may be a process continuously created between you and the world around you. And if that is true, then every version of yourself might be partially artificial. not fake exactly, but constructed. Even memory contributes to the mask. Humans carefully preserve narratives about themselves internally. I'm this kind of person. I would never do that. This is who I truly am. But reality often contradicts those stories. Under pressure, fear, grief, love, anger, or survival, people behave in ways they never imagined possible, which means much of identity may simply be prediction rather than truth. A story consciousness tells itself to maintain stability. The mind needs continuity. It needs a believable character to organize experience around. Without that character, awareness begins feeling chaotic and fragmented, so humans keep reinforcing the face, even privately, even internally. Eventually, the performance becomes so complete that the distinction between authentic and artificial nearly disappears. And maybe that is why certain moments feel strangely liberating. Rare moments where the mask slips unexpectedly. Deep laughter, intense grief, exhaustion, love, fear. In those moments, social performance weakens temporarily, and something raw emerges beneath it, something unfiltered, and people often describe those moments as feeling real, which quietly implies most ordinary existence does not. Perhaps that is the hidden tragedy beneath modern life. Humans become experts at appearing emotionally functional while silently feeling disconnected from themselves internally. The world rewards polished masks, not vulnerability, not uncertainty, not existential confusion. So people adapt, and adaptation slowly transforms into identity. But there is another disturbing layer beneath all of this. Even the real self may not be fully real either, because the moment you try observing yourself honestly, the mind immediately begins constructing another image, another narrative, another explanation of who you are. The observer changes the thing being observed, which means the self may never be fully reachable in pure form, only interpreted, again and again, an endless hall of psychological mirrors reflecting distorted versions of identity back toward awareness. And perhaps that is why humans spend their entire lives searching for themselves, yet never fully arriving. Because there may not be one permanent face hidden beneath all the others, only layers, roles, memories, adaptations, temporary selves forming and dissolving continuously throughout life. Still, the performance continues. Tomorrow you will speak differently to different people without fully noticing it. You will instinctively shape your behavior to fit invisible expectations again. Everyone will do the same. Entire societies built from masks interacting with other masks. And somewhere beneath all those performances, awareness keeps asking the same quiet question. If every face I show the world changes depending on who is watching, then which one was ever truly me? Thought that changes reality when noticed. Some thoughts remain harmless until you notice them clearly. Then suddenly, they begin changing the way reality feels around you. At first, the shift is subtle, almost invisible. You hear an idea once, and nothing happens immediately. The world still looks normal, familiar, stable, but later, usually in silence, the thought quietly returns. And this time something feels different. You cannot stop seeing it anymore. This is one of the strangest psychological experiences a human being can have. Certain thoughts behave almost like hidden patterns. Once awareness notices them, they begin appearing everywhere. A person learns about mortality, and suddenly time feels fragile. A person questions identity, and suddenly every social interaction feels slightly artificial. A person begins wondering whether consciousness shapes perception, and suddenly reality itself starts feeling less solid than before. The disturbing part is not merely the thought, it is the fact that noticing the thought changes experience itself, as though awareness alters reality simply by paying attention to something deeply enough. You can see small examples of this constantly. Imagine buying a specific car for the first time. Suddenly that same car appears everywhere on the road, not because reality changed objectively, but because attention changed. The mind filters reality continuously. Most information remains invisible until awareness decides it matters, and once attention locks onto something emotionally significant, the world reorganizes around it. But existential thoughts behave differently. They go deeper, because they do not simply change what you notice externally. They change the structure through which you experience existence itself. After certain realizations, the world can never feel fully the same again. A person who deeply understands impermanence begins experiencing ordinary moments differently. Conversations feel temporary. Relationships feel fragile. Even joy carries a quiet awareness that it cannot last forever. Nothing external changed, only awareness did. And yet reality itself now feels transformed. This becomes even stranger when you realize the human mind partly creates emotional reality through interpretation. Fear, beauty, meaning, identity. These are not simply objective objects existing independently in the world. They emerge through perception, interacting with experience. In a sense, consciousness participates in constructing reality psychologically. That may explain why two people can exist inside the same world, while emotionally inhabiting completely different realities. One person sees hopelessness everywhere, another sees possibility. One sees isolation, another sees connection. The world outside may remain identical, yet awareness shapes the experience completely differently. And perhaps that is why certain thoughts become dangerous, not because they are false, but because once believed deeply enough, they begin restructuring emotional existence itself. Fear works this way, so does hope, so does identity. The mind slowly becomes whatever thoughts it repeatedly notices and feeds attention toward. That is why silent ideas can quietly transform entire lives over time. A single thought repeated long enough becomes belief. Belief shapes perception. Perception shapes reality, and eventually the mind forgets the process ever began with a thought at all. Sometimes people spend years trapped inside realities built from unnoticed assumptions. I am not enough. Nothing will ever change. I must hide who I truly am. These thoughts begin as mental events, but once accepted fully, they reshape behavior, emotion, relationships, and identity itself. The thought becomes reality psychologically, and perhaps this is why awareness feels so powerful and so dangerous at the same time. Whatever consciousness repeatedly observes begins growing stronger inside experience. Even now, while listening to these ideas, your mind is subtly changing. New perspectives are forming quietly beneath awareness. Certain questions may stay with you after the video ends. Certain realizations may slowly alter the way ordinary life feels tomorrow. And honestly, moments like this are part of why creating these videos takes so much care and effort. Every script is written slowly, thought by thought, trying to create something that truly stays with you long after listening. So if you genuinely enjoy these deep journeys into unsettling questions and paradoxes, consider leaving a like, subscribing, and becoming part of this growing path of curious minds. It truly helps more than most people realize and allows these kinds of videos to keep existing. Now notice something strange. The moment attention fully understands how thought shapes experience, another paradox appears immediately. You begin watching your own mind differently. Thoughts no longer feel completely invisible. You start noticing patterns, emotional loops, fears repeating themselves automatically. Certain ideas shaping your reality silently from beneath awareness. And once noticed, those thoughts begin losing some of their unconscious power, which means awareness does not only create realities, it can also dissolve them. That realization changes everything, because suddenly consciousness becomes both the prison and the escape. The mind creates fear, then notices the fear, then changes through noticing itself. An endless recursive loop where awareness constantly reshapes the reality it experiences. And maybe that explains why humans fear certain truths instinctively. Some thoughts permanently alter perception once fully understood. You cannot unsee them afterward. A child eventually realizes adults are afraid too. A person realizes time moves faster each year. Someone notices how fragile identity truly is. Once awareness sees these patterns clearly enough, ordinary life subtly transforms forever. Reality itself feels different because the observer changed internally, and perhaps the strangest possibility of all is this. Maybe reality has always been partially shaped by attention, not necessarily physically, but experientially. The world you live inside psychologically is deeply connected to what consciousness repeatedly notices, believes, fears, and remembers, meaning the quality of awareness may quietly determine the quality of reality itself. That idea becomes deeply unsettling the longer you sit with it, because it means the mind is never merely observing existence passively. It is participating in it continuously, thought by thought, fear by fear, belief by belief. And somewhere inside that endless process, another dangerous realization begins forming quietly beneath awareness. The thoughts you notice most eventually become the world you live inside. Feeling that something is wrong with existence. Sometimes the feeling appears without warning. Nothing terrible happens. The room is quiet. Life continues normally. And yet, for a brief moment, reality suddenly feels wrong. Not visually wrong, not logically wrong, but emotionally unfamiliar in a way that is almost impossible to explain. You look around at ordinary things, walls, people, streets, your own hands, and a strange sensation quietly enters the mind. Why does any of this exist at all? The unsettling part is that the feeling does not behave like ordinary fear. It feels deeper than fear, more abstract, more existential, almost like awareness itself has briefly stepped outside the illusion of normality and noticed how strange existence truly is. Most humans spend their lives protected from this realization by routine. Wake up, eat, work, speak, sleep, repeat. Familiar patterns create psychological stability. The mind stops questioning reality because questioning everything constantly would make ordinary functioning nearly impossible. But sometimes the protection weakens, and suddenly existence no longer feels automatic. It feels uncanny. You begin noticing things that normally remain invisible. The absurdity of being conscious at all. The fact that humans appeared inside a universe they do not understand. The strange experience of having thoughts, emotions, memories and awareness emerging from matter for reasons nobody can fully explain. The longer you sit with these realizations, the heavier they become. Because the mind naturally expects reality to make emotional sense. But existence often refuses to explain itself clearly, and that creates tension deep inside consciousness. Humans want meaning, structure, direction. They want reality to feel intentional somehow. Yet the universe remains mostly silent. Stars explode without purpose. Entire civilizations disappear eventually. People suffer randomly. Time moves forward without asking permission. And beneath all of it, consciousness briefly appears, only to vanish again. When awareness truly notices this, a strange emotional fracture can occur. A feeling that something about existence itself is fundamentally unresolved. You can see traces of this feeling hidden everywhere in human behavior. People constantly distract themselves. Noise, entertainment, goals, arguments, schedules, endless stimulation filling every empty space. Perhaps because silence gives the existential feeling room to grow. In silence, reality starts becoming strange again. You notice how fragile identity is, how temporary relationships are, how uncertain the future remains. Even language itself begins feeling artificial somehow. Tiny sounds humans invented while standing on a spinning planet inside infinite darkness. The disturbing part is that the feeling does not always come from sadness. Sometimes life can be objectively good, while the sensation still appears. That is what makes it existential rather than emotional. The mind is not reacting to a problem inside life. It is reacting to the mystery of life itself. And perhaps no question intensifies this feeling more than consciousness. Why does awareness exist at all? Why is there subjective experience instead of empty mechanical processes? Why does existence feel like something from the inside? Science can explain parts of the brain, but the existence of conscious experience itself remains deeply mysterious. No one fully understands why matter should suddenly become self-aware, and the longer you think about that, the stranger your own existence begins to feel. You are made of atoms formed inside dead stars, yet somehow those atoms became capable of questioning reality itself. How? Why? The mind searches desperately for satisfying answers, but every explanation eventually reaches another unknown behind it. And eventually the feeling returns. Something is missing. Something about existence remains incomplete. Some philosophers believed this feeling comes from alienation, consciousness separated from meaning in an indifferent universe. Others believed it comes from awareness, realizing its own impermanence. Religious traditions often interpreted the feeling spiritually, as a longing for something beyond ordinary reality. But perhaps the feeling exists because the human mind was never designed to fully comprehend existence clearly. After all, evolution optimized consciousness for survival, not ultimate truth. Humans evolved to hunt, bond, reproduce, and avoid danger, not to comfortably process infinity, mortality, and cosmic uncertainty. So when awareness turns toward those subjects deeply enough, reality begins exceeding the emotional limits of the mind itself. That is why existential awareness often feels physically uncomfortable. The body reacts to abstract uncertainty almost like danger. A racing heartbeat, derealization, a feeling of distance from reality. The mind senses instability, but cannot locate a concrete threat, because the threat is existence itself becoming too visible. And perhaps that is what truly terrifies people. Not death, not suffering, but direct confrontation with how strange reality actually is beneath routine. Most of the time, familiarity acts like hypnosis. Humans stop noticing how bizarre ordinary existence really is. But certain moments break the spell. A sleepless night, a sudden loss, a silent room, a thought that arrives unexpectedly and refuses to leave. Then awareness opens wider than usual, and the world no longer feels entirely normal. For a brief moment, you no longer feel fully inside reality. You feel conscious of reality. And that distinction changes everything. Because consciousness suddenly becomes visible to itself, the mind notices that it is alive, not conceptually, directly. And there is something deeply unsettling about that realization when experienced too clearly. Still, humans continue living, laughing, planning, falling in love, building futures. Perhaps because complete existential awareness would otherwise become unbearable if held continuously. So the mind moves back toward ordinary life again. Routine returns, noise returns, identity rebuilds itself. The strange feeling fades temporarily, but it never disappears completely. Late at night, in silence, during certain thoughts, it quietly returns, the feeling that beneath all familiarity, existence itself remains profoundly mysterious. And perhaps the most disturbing possibility of all is this: the feeling that something is wrong with existence may actually come from briefly seeing existence more clearly than usual. Mind that cannot prove it is awake. Right now, you believe you are awake. The room around you feels real. Your thoughts feel real. Your memories feel connected. Everything appears stable enough that you rarely question it seriously. But how would you actually prove it? Not assume it, not feel it, prove it completely. The longer you think about this question, the more disturbing ordinary consciousness becomes, because every piece of evidence you use to confirm reality comes from the very mind whose accuracy you are trying to verify. You trust your senses because your mind interprets them. You trust logic because your mind produces it. You trust memory because your mind stores it. The system attempting to verify reality is the same system that could potentially misunderstand it, and suddenly certainty begins collapsing inward. Dreams reveal how fragile perception truly is. While dreaming, impossible things often feel completely normal. Entire worlds appear convincing until the moment you wake up. During the dream, you rarely stop and say, "This cannot be real." Instead, the mind accepts the experience automatically. Only afterward does awareness recognize the illusion. But this creates a terrifying possibility. If dreams can feel real while they happen, how can you prove waking life is fundamentally different? Most people answer emotionally rather than logically. Waking reality feels more stable, more consistent, more detailed. But consistency alone is not absolute proof. A sufficiently convincing illusion would also feel internally coherent, and the mind has no external position outside consciousness from which to compare realities objectively. You are trapped inside awareness itself. That is what makes this question so unsettling. A mind cannot fully step outside its own experience to confirm whether experience is genuine. You can test reality endlessly, but every result still arrives through perception, and perception can fail. Hallucinations feel real, false memories feel real, dreams feel real. Emotions distort interpretation constantly. Even time behaves strangely depending on psychological state. So what exactly guarantees that this moment is objectively real in the way you assume? Nothing completely. The disturbing part is not merely philosophical uncertainty. It is the realization that consciousness itself may always contain an unremovable layer of doubt beneath ordinary life. Humans survive by ignoring that doubt most of the time. Routine creates stability. The body creates familiarity. Social agreement creates reassurance. Millions of people sharing the same world gives the illusion of certainty, but shared experience is not perfect proof either. After all, every person you know still exists only as an experience inside your awareness. You never directly leave consciousness itself. Everything happens within it. And perhaps that is why certain moments feel psychologically unreal. Sometimes awareness briefly disconnects from its ordinary certainty and reality starts feeling dreamlike. People describe this sensation in strange ways. It feels like I'm watching life from outside myself. Nothing feels completely real. The world feels slightly artificial somehow. Psychologists call some forms of this derealization, but naming the experience does not remove the deeper existential question beneath it. Why does consciousness feel capable of doubting reality at all? Perhaps because the mind secretly recognizes how dependent experience is on interpretation. You do not experience objective reality directly. You experience a model of reality created by the brain. Colors are interpretations. Sound is interpretation. Time is interpretation. Even your sense of being a continuous self may partly be interpretation. The mind constructs a stable world internally and then forgets it is constructing anything. That realization becomes deeply unsettling the longer you sit with it, because suddenly waking life begins resembling a controlled hallucination shared by consciousness. Stable, yes. Useful, yes, but still filtered entirely through perception. And then another terrifying question appears. What if waking up is impossible? Not physically, existentially. Imagine a dream character becoming self-aware inside a dream. It questions reality. It searches for proof. It doubts the world around it, but everything it uses to investigate remains part of the dream itself. No matter how intelligent the character becomes, it cannot fully escape the system from within. Perhaps human consciousness exists similarly. Perhaps awareness cannot fully verify reality because verification itself depends on the same uncertain framework. And maybe that uncertainty never disappears completely. Humans simply become skilled at ignoring it. That may explain why certain moments feel so psychologically destabilizing. Sleep deprivation, isolation, deep meditation, existential thought, silence, trauma. These experiences weaken the ordinary structures maintaining certainty. Then awareness notices something uncomfortable beneath everyday life. Reality feels convincing, but not absolutely provable. Even memory cannot fully rescue you from this problem. Memories themselves could theoretically belong to an illusion. After all, dreams often contain false histories that feel emotionally authentic while they last. A dream can create an entire past instantly, so can the mind. And suddenly the foundations of certainty begin dissolving one by one. Perception uncertain, memory uncertain, identity uncertain, reality uncertain. At first this sounds terrifying, but perhaps there is another side to the paradox. Maybe certainty was never the point. Maybe consciousness was never meant to possess absolute proof about existence. Perhaps awareness functions through participation rather than total understanding. You live reality directly rather than solving it completely. Still, the discomfort remains, because humans deeply crave stable ground beneath awareness. The mind wants something final, something undeniable, some ultimate proof that existence is exactly what it appears to be. But consciousness may never receive that proof, not fully. And perhaps that is why waking life contains such strange emotional fragility beneath its surface. Humans move through reality confidently while secretly resting upon assumptions they cannot completely verify. The mind believes itself awake because it must. Without that belief, ordinary functioning would collapse into endless uncertainty. So consciousness continues trusting the world automatically, morning after morning, thought after thought, reality after reality. And maybe the strangest part of all is this: even after hearing these questions, even after recognizing the uncertainty, you will still wake up tomorrow and instinctively believe the world is real again. Because perhaps the mind does not need proof to experience reality. It only needs the feeling of certainty strong enough to continue dreaming that it is awake. Future that might already exist. Most people imagine time moving like a river, the past behind them, the present happening now, the future still empty, slowly approaching moment by moment. This feels natural, obvious, almost impossible to question. But certain ideas about time become deeply disturbing the longer you think about them, because some physicists and philosophers have suggested something strange. The future may already exist, not metaphorically, literally. According to certain interpretations of physics, time may not flow at all. Past, present, and future could all exist simultaneously. Like different locations inside a vast structure, humans experience one moment at a time. Imagine a book. Every page already exists at once, yet the reader experiences the story sequentially. The characters inside the story believe the future is unknown because they can only see the current page. But outside the story, the ending already exists. Now imagine consciousness functioning similarly within time itself. Suddenly the future stops feeling open, it begins feeling hidden, and that possibility changes everything. Because if the future already exists somewhere within reality, then many assumptions humans rely on emotionally begin collapsing. Choice feels uncertain. Freedom feels uncertain. Even hope changes meaning. After all, how can something be truly undecided if it already exists? The disturbing part is that modern physics does contain ideas that unintentionally point toward this possibility. Einstein himself once described the distinction between past, present, and future as a stubbornly persistent illusion. Relativity reveals something strange about time. Different observers can experience events in different orders depending on movement and perspective. This suggests time may behave less like a flowing universal clock and more like a dimension intertwined with space itself. And dimensions do not move, they simply exist. The human mind struggles deeply with this idea because consciousness experiences time emotionally. You feel moments arriving and disappearing continuously. The present feels alive while the future feels unwritten. But feelings are not always accurate descriptions of reality. After all, the Earth feels motionless while spinning through space at terrifying speed. Maybe time only feels like movement because consciousness experiences reality sequentially, and perhaps the future has been there all along. That thought becomes existential immediately, because if tomorrow already exists, then somewhere within reality, your future self may already be thinking thoughts you have not yet reached consciously. Future conversations already spoken, future grief already experienced, future joy already lived. Entire years waiting silently ahead of awareness, like unopened rooms inside a house that already stands complete. The mind instinctively resists this idea because uncertainty provides emotional freedom. Humans survive psychologically through possibility. The belief that life remains open creates motivation, hope, and meaning. But if the future already exists, then perhaps life resembles discovery more than creation. You are not building reality moment by moment, you are moving through it. And maybe that explains certain strange feelings humans experience occasionally. Moments of déjà vu, sudden intuitions, the eerie sensation that something feels familiar before it happens. Most likely these experiences arise from ordinary brain processes. But emotionally, they create a strange impression, as though part of the mind briefly touched something already waiting ahead in time. And perhaps even stranger is the possibility that your future may already influence you psychologically. Humans constantly imagine tomorrow, fear tomorrow, plan tomorrow. The future shapes present behavior even before arriving. In a sense, unseen events already control parts of your current life. A future fear creates anxiety today. A future hope creates motivation today. The future behaves almost like an invisible force, pulling consciousness forward through time. And the longer you think about this, the stranger identity becomes. Because who are you exactly? The present self? The child you once were? The future version already waiting ahead? Humans usually imagine themselves as singular beings existing only now. But if time is structurally real all at once, then every version of you may exist simultaneously across time. The child still exists in the past. The elderly version still exists in the future. Different moments of one continuous consciousness stretched across time like frames of a film. That idea feels haunting because it changes death itself. Normally people imagine death as the disappearance of existence entirely. But if all moments continue existing structurally within time, then perhaps every moment of your life remains permanently embedded within reality forever. Your childhood still exists, every conversation still exists, every laugh, every fear, every silent night. Nothing truly vanishes from the structure of time itself. Yet consciousness only experiences one fragment at once, and perhaps that limitation creates the illusion of disappearance. Still, another terrifying possibility appears immediately afterward. If the future already exists, can anything truly change? This question frightens people because it attacks the emotional core of human existence. Humans need to believe choices matter, that actions alter outcomes, that effort shapes reality meaningfully. But a fully existing future seems to imply inevitability, as though every triumph and every tragedy already quietly waits ahead beyond awareness. The mind recoils from this because inevitability feels emotionally suffocating. Yet perhaps humans misunderstand what existence within time means. Imagine again the book analogy. The ending may already exist, but the characters still experience decisions genuinely from within the story. Their emotions remain real. Their struggles remain real. Their uncertainty remains real. Maybe consciousness experiences freedom internally, even if time exists structurally beyond it. And perhaps that is enough. Still, certain thoughts become difficult to escape once noticed. Somewhere ahead in time exists the final moment of your life, the last conversation, the last breath, the final thing you will ever think. And if the future already exists, then that moment may already be waiting silently beyond awareness right now. Unseen, untouched, but real. The unsettling part is that you cannot know how close or far away it is. Tomorrow feels open because consciousness cannot see beyond the current page. But hidden pages may already contain everything. Every success, every heartbreak, every loss, every answer, and maybe that is why time feels emotionally strange deep down. Humans move through existence believing they are approaching the unknown, while perhaps the unknown has been waiting for them all along. Still, life continues normally somehow. People make plans, fall in love, worry about tomorrow, as though the future remains unwritten. Perhaps because psychologically, humans need uncertainty, even if reality itself contains more structure than awareness can perceive. And maybe the most disturbing realization of all is this: the person you will eventually become may already exist somewhere ahead in time, quietly waiting for you to arrive. Person you could have become. Somewhere inside your mind lives a person who never existed, a version of you built from abandoned choices, missed opportunities, different timing, different fears, different courage, the life you did not live. Most people rarely think about this deeply because ordinary life demands attention toward the present. But sometimes, especially late at night, the mind quietly drifts toward impossible questions. What if I had said yes instead of no? What if I had left earlier, stayed longer, tried harder, loved differently? The unsettling part is that every decision destroys countless possible futures instantly. The moment one path becomes real, thousands of others disappear forever, or at least they disappear from experience, but psychologically they continue haunting the mind. Humans do not only live with memories of the past, they live with ghosts of unrealized futures, and some of those ghosts become difficult to escape. You can feel this phenomenon during moments of regret, not ordinary regret over mistakes, but deeper existential regret, the painful sense that another version of yourself might have become happier, wiser, freer, or more complete if life had unfolded slightly differently. Sometimes this feeling appears suddenly when seeing old photographs. You look at a younger version of yourself and realize that person carried futures that no longer exist, dreams abandoned quietly, relationships never formed, talents never explored, entire identities erased by time and circumstance. The disturbing part is that those lost versions often feel emotionally real, almost close enough to touch. The mind can imagine them so vividly that they begin feeling like parallel lives existing somewhere beyond reach, and perhaps that is why humans fear irreversible decisions so deeply. Every permanent choice closes invisible doors forever. A career chosen means countless others vanish. One relationship prevents infinite others. Even small moments shape identity permanently in ways impossible to predict at the time. A single conversation can redirect an entire life. A single fear can silently reshape decades. And the mind never fully stops wondering who it might have become otherwise. This becomes especially unsettling when you realize personality itself is fragile. Humans often think identity reflects some stable inner essence, but much of who you are emerged through circumstances you never chose. Different parents, different country, different childhood experiences, different emotional wounds, and you would likely become an entirely different person, not just slightly different, fundamentally different, different fears, different beliefs, different desires, different ways of understanding reality itself, which raises a deeply uncomfortable question. Was there ever one real you to begin with? Or are humans simply one outcome among countless possible selves that could have emerged under different conditions? The longer you sit with this thought, the less stable identity begins feeling, because suddenly the self appears less like a fixed soul and more like a temporary pattern shaped by randomness, memory, environment, and time. The person listening to these words right now was never inevitable. You are one version among many that might have existed, and perhaps somewhere inside your own mind, the other versions still linger faintly. You can hear them sometimes. The artist you almost became, the confident version that never learned fear, the person who left instead of staying, the version who forgave, the version who destroyed everything. the version who found peace. These unrealized selves create a strange emotional weight because consciousness cannot stop imagining alternatives. Humans mentally simulate different lives constantly. If only, what if? I wonder who I'd be now. And maybe that is why nostalgia often feels painful rather than comforting. Nostalgia is not merely longing for the past. It is longing for lost possibilities hidden inside the past. A memory hurts because it contains futures that no longer exist. That old friendship once carried decades of imagined moments. That relationship once carried imagined forever. That younger version of you once believed countless things were still possible. Then time quietly narrowed reality into one path, the path you now call your life. But perhaps the most disturbing realization comes later. Sometimes people become strangers to themselves, not because they changed suddenly, but because they slowly abandoned who they once hoped to become. Responsibilities replace dreams, fear replaces curiosity, survival replaces wonder, and eventually a strange emptiness appears. The feeling that the current self no longer resembles the person who once existed inside imagination. This feeling can become existential because humans need continuity emotionally. People want to believe life moves toward meaningfully becoming themselves. But what if identity is partly shaped by compromise, adaptation, and loss, rather than authentic destiny? What if adulthood often means slowly becoming less of who you imagined? That thought quietly terrifies many people. And perhaps this is why certain encounters feel emotionally overwhelming. Meeting someone from your past, returning to an old place, hearing a forgotten song. Suddenly old versions of yourself reactivate temporarily. Forgotten identities rise from memory like ghosts. For a brief moment, you remember who you almost became, and the contrast between past possibility and present reality can feel haunting. Still, there is another side to this paradox. The imagined better version of yourself may also be partly illusion. The mind naturally idealizes unlived lives because unrealized futures never face reality's imperfections. The road not taken remains psychologically clean, untouched by disappointment. But real lives contain pain, no matter which path is chosen. Every possible self would eventually suffer, fear, regret, and lose something important. There is no version of you completely free from uncertainty, and perhaps that realization matters. Because humans often torture themselves, comparing reality against imagined identities that never truly existed anywhere except possibility. Still, the emotional weight remains. Somewhere inside awareness lives the sense that another self almost emerged once. A different face, a different life, a different story. And perhaps the strangest part is this: you will never fully know whether the person you became was the best possible version or simply the version time happened to leave behind. Even now, countless future selves still wait ahead invisibly, some shaped by courage, some shaped by fear, some shaped by choices you have not yet realized are approaching. And one day, years from now, you may look back again and quietly wonder about the person you still could have become, if only certain moments had unfolded differently. Fear that grows when explained. Most fears become smaller once understood. A child fears thunder until someone explains storms. A person fears illness until doctors identify the cause. Knowledge usually calms the mind because understanding creates structure, and structure creates emotional safety. But some fears behave differently. Some fears become far more disturbing the more clearly they are explained, because explanation does not remove them, it deepens them. Take death, for example. Children often fear death vaguely at first. It feels distant, abstract, almost fictional. But as awareness grows, the mind slowly begins understanding what death truly means. Every thought ending, every memory disappearing, every person eventually gone. The fear grows because explanation makes the reality more emotionally visible. And perhaps that is what makes certain existential fears so powerful. They are not built from misunderstanding. They emerge from understanding itself. The human mind instinctively believes truth should create comfort. Yet some truths produce the opposite effect. The clearer they become, the harder they are to emotionally survive. This creates a strange paradox. Awareness seeks understanding, while deeper understanding sometimes increases suffering. You can see this throughout human existence. Ancient humans feared the darkness because they imagined monsters hidden within it. Modern humans removed many of those fears through science and reason, but science introduced entirely new existential fears in return. The universe is unimaginably vast. Human life is cosmically temporary. Consciousness itself remains mysterious. Entire galaxies exist beyond comprehension, and eventually even stars die. Suddenly the darkness becomes frightening again, not because of monsters, but because of scale. The more humans learn about reality, the stranger reality often becomes. And perhaps no fear grows faster through explanation than the fear of meaninglessness. At first, people assume life naturally contains purpose. Childhood often protects the mind with invisible certainty. Existence feels emotionally structured somehow, important, guided. But eventually awareness begins asking difficult questions. What if meaning is not built into reality? What if humans create meaning themselves because existence offers none automatically? At first this sounds philosophical, but the longer the mind sits with it, the heavier it becomes. Because if meaning depends entirely on fragile human interpretation, then purpose itself begins feeling temporary, conditional, psychologically constructed, and that realization quietly destabilizes the emotional foundation beneath ordinary life. The disturbing part is that explanation removes protective illusions humans rarely realize they depend upon. People often want truth, but only truth that allows emotional stability to survive intact. When truth threatens identity, certainty, or existential comfort, the mind reacts with fear automatically. This is why awareness can become psychologically exhausting. The deeper consciousness examines reality, the more unstable certain assumptions become. Free will uncertain, identity uncertain, memory uncertain, reality uncertain. The mind searches for solid ground, but repeatedly encounters mystery beneath the surface of everything. And perhaps that is why some people avoid deep existential thinking entirely. Not because they lack intelligence, But because prolonged awareness can feel emotionally dangerous, certain thoughts expand endlessly once understood deeply enough. The fear does not disappear through analysis, it multiplies. Take the fear of time. As children, humans experience time slowly. Years feel enormous. Life appears endless. But eventually awareness notices something deeply unsettling. Time accelerates psychologically. Weeks vanish, months collapse, entire years disappear faster and faster. Then explanation arrives. The brain compresses familiar experiences, making life seem to move quicker over time. At first, this explanation feels interesting, then terrifying. Because now the fear possesses structure. The mind suddenly realizes how rapidly existence is dissolving beneath awareness. And once noticed clearly enough, the feeling becomes difficult to escape. This happens repeatedly with existential fears. Explanation sharpens emotional clarity instead of removing discomfort. Even consciousness itself becomes stranger when analyzed carefully. Most people assume awareness is simple because they experience it constantly. But deeper examination reveals immense mystery. Why does subjective experience exist at all? How does matter become self-aware? Why is there someone experiencing reality from inside the brain? Science explains mechanisms surrounding consciousness, yet consciousness itself remains unresolved. And the more honestly people confront this mystery, the stranger their own existence begins feeling. You are a temporary awareness formed from particles born inside ancient stars, somehow capable of questioning the universe itself. Explanation does not reduce the weirdness, it intensifies it. And perhaps this reveals something important about fear. Not all fear comes from ignorance. Some fear comes from direct contact with reality's deeper complexity. Humans evolved to survive immediate physical threats, not to comfortably process infinity, mortality, uncertainty, and cosmic scale. The mind can intellectually approach these subjects, but emotionally it struggles to absorb them fully. That mismatch creates existential fear. The more clearly awareness sees reality, the more emotionally overwhelming reality can become. Still, humans continue searching for explanations anyway. Why? Perhaps because consciousness cannot stop seeking understanding, even when understanding hurts. The mind would rather confront terrifying truth than remain permanently blind. Or maybe humans secretly hope there exists some final explanation capable of resolving fear completely. But perhaps no such explanation exists. Perhaps reality simply contains mysteries too large for emotional certainty. And maybe that is why certain fears never fully disappear, no matter how rationally they are analyzed. Fear of death, fear of isolation, fear of meaninglessness, fear of losing identity. These fears are woven directly into conscious existence itself. Understanding them only reveals how deeply they reach. Yet strangely, humans continue living despite this, laughing, creating, loving, building futures beneath infinite uncertainty. Perhaps courage is not the absence of existential fear, but the decision to continue existing meaningfully, even while seeing the fear clearly. Still, late at night, certain explanations return quietly. Thoughts that once felt abstract suddenly feel personal, and the mind realizes something deeply unsettling. Some fears were never waiting to be solved, only understood more completely. And once fully understood, they grow larger than before. Observer that cannot observe itself. Right now, you are aware. You are hearing these words, noticing thoughts, experiencing emotions, sensing existence unfolding moment by moment. But there is something strange hidden inside awareness itself. You can observe almost everything except the observer. You can notice your thoughts. You can examine memories. You can analyze emotions. You can even observe your own body as though it were an object inside experience. But the one thing doing the observing always remains just beyond reach. And the longer you think about this, the more unsettling consciousness becomes. Try it carefully. Notice your thoughts. Now notice the awareness watching those thoughts. Then try to observe the awareness itself directly. Something strange happens immediately. The observer slips away. The moment you attempt to see it clearly, it becomes the thing looking again. Like an eye trying to turn inward and fully see itself without a mirror. Impossible. This creates one of the deepest paradoxes hidden inside consciousness. The mind can observe nearly everything except the source of observation itself. And perhaps that means the most familiar thing in your entire existence is also the least understood. Humans spend their lives focused outward. The world feels external and visible, while awareness feels automatic, invisible, unquestioned. But certain moments interrupt this ordinary flow. Deep silence, meditation, exhaustion, existential thought. In those moments, consciousness sometimes becomes aware of itself directly. And the experience can feel profoundly strange, because awareness suddenly realizes it cannot locate the self it assumes is there. Most people imagine identity as a stable observer hidden somewhere inside the mind, a central you experiencing life continuously. But when consciousness searches carefully for this observer, the result becomes unclear. Thoughts appear, sensations appear, memories appear, emotions appear, but the observer itself never fully appears as an object. Only observing remains. This realization disturbed philosophers and spiritual thinkers for thousands of years. Some concluded the self is an illusion, not because awareness is unreal, but because humans mistakenly imagine a permanent observer separate from experience itself. Perhaps there is no hidden entity watching life unfold. Perhaps there is only awareness happening. The mind resists this idea immediately because humans need psychological continuity. People want to feel like solid individuals moving through time. Without that stability, existence begins feeling frighteningly open and undefined. So consciousness creates identity narratives automatically. My thoughts, my personality, my life. But beneath language, the observer remains strangely impossible to locate precisely. And maybe that is why self-awareness can become psychologically destabilizing if examined too deeply. Normally the mind functions by identifying with thoughts automatically. Fear feels personal, desire feels personal, memory feels personal. But the moment awareness steps back and observes those experiences clearly, another unsettling possibility appears. What if thoughts are not the self? After all, thoughts constantly change, emotions constantly change, Personality shifts over time. Even memory rewrites itself continuously. Yet something remains present through all those changes: simple awareness itself. The strange part is that awareness has no clear shape, age, or personality when examined directly. It simply experiences, silent, invisible, difficult to define. And perhaps that explains why moments of deep presence can feel both peaceful and terrifying simultaneously. The usual story of me weakens temporarily, leaving awareness exposed without its normal psychological structure. For some people this feels liberating, for others deeply unsettling, because the observer cannot fully confirm its own nature. Imagine trying to bite your own teeth or stand outside your own shadow completely. Consciousness faces a similar limitation. The observer can investigate everything except the fundamental source of observation itself. And maybe that limitation is permanent. The mind searches endlessly for certainty about identity, yet the very mechanism doing the searching remains mysterious. This becomes especially strange when considering memory. Most people believe continuity of memory proves the existence of a stable self. But memory changes constantly, and still awareness continues. Even during moments where identity shifts dramatically, the feeling of being aware remains strangely familiar. Who exactly is that awareness? Where is it located? Inside the brain, emerging from neural activity, something beyond ordinary physical explanation? No one fully knows. And the deeper science examines consciousness, the stranger the mystery often becomes. The brain can be studied physically, yet subjective awareness, the direct experience of being conscious, remains profoundly difficult to explain. Matter somehow becomes experience. Particles somehow become observation. And inside that process, the observer itself remains hidden from direct inspection. Perhaps because the observer is not an object within reality, but the condition through which reality becomes experience at all. That idea becomes existential quickly. Because if the observer cannot fully observe itself, then consciousness may always contain an unresolvable blind spot at its center. Humans may never completely understand what they fundamentally are. Still, ordinary life continues somehow. People argue, work, fall in love, build identities, all while carrying an invisible mystery within them constantly. The mystery of the observer, and occasionally, usually late at night or during moments of deep silence, awareness suddenly notices itself noticing. For a brief second, reality feels almost dreamlike. The world appears, thoughts appear, the body appears, yet the observer remains invisible behind all of it. An emptiness that experiences, a presence that cannot fully become an object to itself. And maybe that is why consciousness feels so uncanny when examined too carefully. Because the closer awareness moves toward itself, the more it discovers there may be no final self waiting there to find, only observation endlessly turning inward without ever reaching the center. Reality that might only exist for you. Every experience you have ever had exists inside your consciousness. Every person, every sound, every memory, every fear, every moment of love, pain, beauty, and confusion has only ever appeared inside awareness itself. You have never experienced reality outside your own mind directly. And the longer you think about that, the stranger existence becomes. Most people assume the external world exists independently and objectively exactly as it appears. The universe feels solid, shared, stable. Other people seem unquestionably real because they speak, react, and behave like conscious beings. But there is a terrifying philosophical problem hidden beneath ordinary life. You cannot fully prove any consciousness exists beyond your own, not completely. You assume others experience awareness because they resemble you. They laugh, suffer, dream, and speak about emotions. But all of that still arrives as experience inside your mind. You never directly enter another consciousness. You only observe behavior, which means every person you have ever known exists for you entirely through perception. And suddenly another disturbing possibility appears. What if reality only exists inside awareness itself? This idea is called solipsism in philosophy, the possibility that your consciousness may be the only thing that can truly be confirmed to exist. Most people reject the idea instantly because it feels emotionally horrifying. Humans survive psychologically through shared reality. Connection depends on believing other minds exist independently. Without that belief, existence becomes unbearably isolated. But the unsettling part is not whether solipsism is true. It is the fact that consciousness cannot fully disprove it. You are trapped inside experience itself. Everything you know about reality arrives through perception, memory, and thought, all processes occurring within awareness. Even science depends on observation. Even logic happens inside consciousness. There is no escape outside experience from which you can objectively verify reality completely. That realization changes ordinary life in subtle ways, once noticed deeply enough. People begin feeling strangely dreamlike sometimes. The world feels familiar, yet psychologically distant, as though existence itself behaves more like appearance than certainty. Not because reality disappears, but because awareness notices how dependent experience is on consciousness. Imagine dreaming tonight. Inside the dream, people speak convincingly, cities exist, conversations happen, emotions feel real. The dream world appears external while it lasts. Yet every character and every environment ultimately emerged from one consciousness, your own. Now consider waking life. How would a dream character prove it was not existing inside a mind-generated reality? The question becomes difficult quickly, and perhaps that is why certain moments feel existentially unstable. During derealization, deep introspection, or silence, ordinary assumptions about reality weaken slightly. The world still functions normally, yet something feels psychologically uncertain beneath the surface, as though consciousness suddenly notices its inability to step outside itself. The disturbing part is not merely isolation. It is the possibility that reality and awareness may be inseparable in ways humans barely understand. After all, what does reality even mean without consciousness experiencing it? A universe without observers may exist physically, but experience itself requires awareness. Colors, sound, meaning, beauty, these qualities emerge through conscious perception. In some sense, consciousness does not merely observe reality. It participates in creating experienced reality continuously. That thought becomes even stranger when applied to identity. Every person you know exists differently inside your awareness than inside anyone else's. Your mother exists as your experience of her. Your friends exist as interpretations inside your consciousness. Even your own identity exists through self-perception. Reality becomes a network of subjective worlds overlapping imperfectly, but you can never directly leave your own, never fully. This creates a silent loneliness hidden beneath all human existence. No matter how deeply people connect emotionally, every mind ultimately experiences reality privately. No one can feel your exact pain directly. No one can fully enter your consciousness. You remain permanently inside awareness itself, and perhaps that is why humans crave connection so intensely. Love temporarily softens the terrifying isolation of subjective existence. Conversation creates the illusion of shared inner worlds. Relationships make consciousness feel less alone inside itself, but the separation never fully disappears, not completely. Even now, while listening to these words, only you can experience your awareness directly. No one else can enter this exact moment from inside your mind. And maybe that is the deepest existential mystery of all. Why are there separate centers of consciousness at all? Why should awareness feel divided into individuals rather than unified somehow? No one truly knows. Some philosophies suggest individuality itself may partly be illusion, consciousness temporarily experiencing itself through different perspectives. Others argue separate minds are fundamentally real and permanently isolated. Both possibilities feel strange. Either consciousness is terrifyingly alone, or individuality itself may not be as solid as it appears. The mind struggles with both ideas because humans instinctively need stable boundaries between self and world. Ordinary life depends on those boundaries feeling reliable, but deep introspection weakens them. The observer and observed begin feeling interconnected somehow. Reality starts appearing less like a fixed external object and more like an experience unfolding inside awareness. Still, everyday life continues somehow despite this mystery. People wake up, work jobs, laugh with friends, plan futures, all while carrying an impossible philosophical problem silently beneath ordinary thought. Everything they know exists only through consciousness, and consciousness cannot fully step outside itself to confirm what reality truly is beyond experience. Perhaps that uncertainty is permanent. Perhaps humans are not meant to solve it completely. Still, late at night, certain thoughts return quietly. Thoughts that make the world feel slightly unreal for a moment. Questions that create distance between awareness and ordinary certainty. And among those questions, one remains especially difficult to escape. If every experience exists only inside consciousness, then how much of reality exists independently from the mind experiencing it now? Question that erases identity. There are certain questions the mind does not like holding for too long. Not because they are difficult, but because they quietly begin dissolving the person asking them. Most questions leave identity untouched. You can ask about science, history, philosophy, or the universe while still feeling like yourself afterward. But some questions turn inward, and once they do, the structure of the self begins weakening. One of the most dangerous questions is also one of the simplest. Who am I without my thoughts? At first, the mind answers automatically. I am my personality, my memories, my beliefs, my emotions. But each answer quickly becomes unstable under deeper examination. Your personality changes over time. Your memories can be distorted. Your beliefs shift constantly. Your emotions appear and disappear automatically. So none of those things remain permanently reliable. Then another unsettling realization appears. Everything you normally identify with is temporary, and suddenly identity begins losing solidity. The disturbing part is not confusion. It is the feeling that the self may partly be constructed from unstable processes continuously changing beneath awareness. Humans spend their entire lives reinforcing identity narratives. This is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what defines me. But the moment consciousness examines those definitions deeply enough, cracks begin appearing everywhere. The mind realizes it cannot locate a fixed self clearly, only patterns, habits, memories, roles, thoughts repeating themselves long enough to feel personal. And perhaps that is why certain experiences feel existentially terrifying. Meditation, silence, grief, isolation, deep introspection. These experiences weaken ordinary identity structures temporarily. Without constant distraction, awareness starts noticing something strange. The self feels less permanent than it once appeared. This realization often begins subtly. You notice thoughts appearing automatically without choosing them. You observe emotions shifting unpredictably. You realize your opinions were shaped by experiences you never controlled. Then the question deepens further. If thoughts are not fully chosen, and personality constantly changes, then what exactly is the I claiming ownership over experience? The mind desperately searches for stability here because identity provides psychological survival. Humans need continuity emotionally. Without a stable self-story, ordinary existence begins feeling disorienting. So consciousness constructs narratives constantly. A name, a history, a role, a future. But narratives are fragile things. One trauma can change personality. One memory loss can erase identity. One emotional collapse can make a person feel unfamiliar to themselves entirely. The self appears stable, mostly because change happens gradually enough to go unnoticed day by day. Yet if you compare who you are now to who you were 10 years ago, the differences can become shocking. Different fears, different desires, different worldview, different emotional reality. In some sense, multiple versions of you have already existed and disappeared throughout life, and none remained permanently. That thought becomes deeply unsettling late at night because humans instinctively imagine themselves as continuous beings moving through time unchanged at the core. But perhaps continuity is partly illusion created by memory and narration. The mind stitches separate moments together into one identity story and calls it me. And maybe that story is more fragile than people realize. This is where the truly dangerous question appears. If every part of identity can change, what remains? Some philosophies answer this by claiming pure awareness remains beneath all change. Others argue there is no permanent self at all, only consciousness continuously unfolding moment by moment without a stable center. Both possibilities feel unsettling. Either the self is emptier than imagined, or it is something impossible to fully define. And perhaps that is why humans cling so tightly to labels and roles. Careers, relationships, ideologies, beliefs. These structures reinforce identity psychologically. They create the feeling of solidity. But deep questioning weakens those structures one by one. Eventually, awareness stands alone, without familiar definitions, and many people instinctively retreat before reaching that point, because prolonged self-examination can feel like psychological disappearance. The ordinary sense of me starts dissolving into observation itself. For brief moments, awareness exists without clear identity attached to it. Just experience happening. No stable owner, no permanent center, only consciousness. Some describe this as peaceful. Others experience it as terrifying, because identity functions like gravity for the human mind. It organizes reality emotionally. Without it, existence begins feeling vast, uncertain, almost dreamlike. Even language struggles here. Every sentence assumes a stable self exists. I think, I feel, I want. But deeper observation reveals thoughts, feelings, and desires often arise automatically before conscious control appears. The I, claiming ownership, may partly arrive afterward as interpretation, and once noticed clearly enough, ordinary identity becomes difficult to trust completely. This does not mean the self is fake exactly. Perhaps identity behaves more like a process than an object. A continuously updated story consciousness tells itself to navigate reality coherently. Useful, necessary, but not ultimately fixed. Still, another disturbing layer remains. Humans fear losing identity more than almost anything else. Memory loss terrifies people. Social rejection terrifies people. Isolation terrifies people, because all of these threaten the structure of selfhood directly. The mind would rather suffer as a known identity than dissolve into uncertainty completely. And perhaps that explains why existential questions often feel emotionally dangerous. They do not merely challenge ideas, they challenge the one asking the questions. Every answer changes identity slightly. Every realization reshapes the self, until eventually awareness notices something strange. The person who began the questioning no longer fully exists in the same way anymore. The questions slowly erased them, or perhaps revealed they were never as solid as they believed. Still, life continues somehow. The mind rebuilds identity again each morning automatically. A name returns, a personality returns, a story returns, and consciousness continues moving through reality, wearing the temporary structure called me. But deep beneath that structure, another possibility quietly remains waiting. Maybe the self is not something you truly are, but something awareness continuously creates, so it does not have to face the terrifying openness underneath. Control that disappears when examined. Most people believe they are in control of themselves, not completely perhaps, but enough to feel stable, enough to believe they direct their thoughts, behaviors, decisions and emotions through conscious intention. This belief feels natural, obvious, necessary. But the longer you examine control carefully, the more it begins slipping away. Because many of the things humans think they control happen automatically long before awareness notices them. Your heart beats without permission. Your emotions rise before logic reacts. Thoughts appear unexpectedly. Desires form on their own. Even attention itself moves unpredictably from one thing to another, and suddenly a disturbing question appears. What exactly are you controlling directly? Try something simple. Decide what your next thought will be before it arrives. Not generally, exactly. You cannot. The thought simply appears, then awareness claims ownership afterward. This realization feels small at first, but it slowly expands into something deeply unsettling. The more honestly consciousness examines itself, the harder it becomes to locate a clear controller directing mental life completely. Instead, experience appears to unfold automatically much of the time. Thoughts emerge, emotions emerge, impulses emerge, and awareness witnesses the process while feeling personally responsible for it. The disturbing part is that the feeling of control remains emotionally convincing even while direct examination weakens it. Humans experience themselves as agents because consciousness naturally creates a sense of authorship around actions and decisions, but feelings are not proof. After all, dreams feel real while they happen too. And perhaps nowhere does this paradox become clearer than anxiety. An anxious person desperately tries to stop worrying, yet the mind continues generating fear automatically. If total control truly existed, unwanted thoughts could simply be turned off instantly, but they cannot. The harder people sometimes try to control certain thoughts, the stronger those thoughts become. This creates a terrifying psychological loop. The mind attempts control, fails, then becomes afraid of the failure itself, and fear further weakens control. Eventually, consciousness realizes something deeply strange. Many mental processes operate independently from deliberate intention. You can observe this during ordinary life constantly. A song repeats in your head without permission. A memory resurfaces unexpectedly. An emotional reaction appears before conscious reasoning catches up. Even attraction often happens automatically. You do not choose what face suddenly feels beautiful to you. You do not choose what memory suddenly hurts. You do not choose what thought suddenly frightens you at 3 a.m. These experiences emerge spontaneously from somewhere beneath conscious awareness, and perhaps that means the conscious self controls far less than it imagines. The mind resists this realization instinctively because control creates emotional safety. Humans need to feel agency to function psychologically. Without some sense of control, reality begins feeling chaotic and unpredictable. So consciousness constructs a stable narrative. I am deciding, I am thinking, I am controlling my life. But closer examination reveals that the process is far less clear. Even your personality emerged largely from conditions you never chose. Genetics, childhood, culture, trauma, environment, all shaping behavior silently before awareness fully developed. Then identity formed afterward and called the result me. This becomes especially eerie during moments where consciousness observes itself directly. Meditation often reveals thoughts arising automatically without effort. Awareness simply watches the mind generating content endlessly on its own. At first, this can feel liberating, then unsettling, because the observer realizes the machinery of thought never needed permission to begin running, and perhaps that explains why silence can feel uncomfortable. Without distraction, people start noticing how little control they possess over mental activity itself. The mind keeps moving, keep thinking, keep generating, even when you want rest. Especially when you want rest. This is why insomnia often becomes psychologically disturbing. A person lies in darkness begging the mind to become quiet, yet consciousness cannot force silence directly. Thought continues automatically, like weather moving through awareness. The more desperately control is pursued, the more elusive it becomes. And perhaps that is the hidden paradox beneath all conscious existence. Control feels strongest when unquestioned, and weakest when examined carefully. Imagine trying to manually control every process keeping you alive. Every breath, every heartbeat, every hormone, every neuron. Impossible. Life functions largely through unconscious systems operating beneath awareness continuously. Consciousness may influence certain patterns, but it does not fully govern the vast machinery producing experience itself. And perhaps that means the self is less like a ruler and more like a passenger partially participating in a process already unfolding. Still, humans continue behaving as though control exists completely. Society depends on it emotionally. Morality depends on it. Responsibility depends on it. Identity depends on it. Without the belief in agency, ordinary life becomes existentially unstable. Yet awareness cannot entirely ignore the cracks either. Moments of failure reveal them. Addiction reveals them. Compulsion reveals them. Grief reveals them. People discover thoughts and emotions capable of overpowering conscious intention despite every effort to resist. And suddenly the illusion of total control begins collapsing. But perhaps there is another way to understand freedom. Maybe freedom was never absolute command over every thought and feeling. Perhaps true freedom exists in awareness itself, the ability to notice mental processes without becoming completely trapped inside them automatically. Not perfect control, not total authorship, but conscious participation. Still, even this possibility remains strange, because the desire to become more aware also arises from causes you did not consciously choose. The paradox loops endlessly. Every explanation creates another layer of uncertainty beneath it. Who controls the controller? What chooses the chooser? The mind searches for a final stable source of agency, but repeatedly encounters processes generating themselves automatically. And perhaps that is why existential thought can feel dizzying. Consciousness keeps turning inward, trying to locate ultimate control, only to discover deeper layers of mystery each time. Eventually, the observer reaches a terrifying possibility. The sense of being fully in control may itself be part of the experience consciousness creates. not evidence that such control truly exists in the way humans imagine. Still, tomorrow morning you will wake up and continue feeling like a self directing your life again. You will make plans, make decisions, set goals, because psychologically, humans cannot function without at least some experience of agency. Perhaps the feeling itself matters more than absolute proof, or perhaps the final illusion consciousness protects most carefully is the belief that someone inside the mind is truly holding the controls. Thought that continues after you ignore it. Some thoughts disappear the moment attention leaves them. Others do something far stranger. They continue growing in silence. You try to ignore them, distract yourself, move on. Yet somewhere beneath ordinary awareness, the thought remains alive, quietly expanding until it eventually returns stronger than before. Most people experience this with fear first. A disturbing question enters the mind unexpectedly. What if something is wrong with me? What if reality is not what it seems? What if I never escape this feeling? At first, the mind tries pushing the thought away immediately, but the harder consciousness resists certain thoughts, the more emotionally powerful they often become. And this creates one of the strangest paradoxes inside human psychology. Some thoughts survive specifically because you are trying not to think them. You can test this instantly. Tell yourself not to imagine a dark, empty room, not to picture silence, not to think about loneliness. The mind immediately creates the image anyway. Why? Because consciousness must internally represent a thought in order to avoid it. The very act of suppression keeps the thought active beneath awareness. And perhaps that explains why certain fears become psychologically inescapable. People believe they are fighting the thought, but the struggle itself secretly feeds it. The disturbing part is that ignored thoughts do not remain frozen. They evolve, quietly, silently, beneath conscious attention. A fear ignored for years can slowly shape behavior without awareness realizing it. Childhood insecurities become adult anxieties. Repressed grief transforms into emotional numbness. Unanswered existential questions linger beneath ordinary life, like invisible pressure waiting to surface again. The mind forgets consciously, but something continues processing underneath. This becomes especially strange when considering intrusive thoughts. Humans often experience sudden thoughts completely disconnected from their conscious intentions. Violent images, irrational fears, disturbing possibilities. Most people feel immediate discomfort because the thoughts seem alien somehow. This is not me. I don't want this thought. But the more emotionally resistant a person becomes toward certain thoughts, the more attention those thoughts receive psychologically. And attention gives them energy. This is why anxiety loops can become so powerful. The mind notices a frightening thought, reacts emotionally, then monitors whether the thought returns. That monitoring itself keeps awareness focused on the fear continuously. Eventually, the person becomes trapped inside a cycle where resistance strengthens the very thing being resisted. And perhaps this reveals something deeply unsettling about consciousness itself. The mind cannot fully force itself not to think, because thought behaves partly like weather, spontaneous, shifting, difficult to command directly. You can influence thought patterns over time, perhaps, but moment-to-moment mental activity often emerges automatically from deeper unconscious processes, and those unconscious processes never truly stop. Even while sleeping, the brain continues generating dreams, emotions, and memory integration beneath awareness. Part of the mind is always active somewhere in darkness. That realization becomes existential late at night, because suddenly consciousness no longer feels like a single unified self. It feels layered. Surface awareness floating above deeper invisible systems constantly moving beneath it, and maybe those deeper layers know things the conscious mind avoids. Humans often sense truths emotionally long before consciously admitting them. A relationship feels wrong before logic explains why. Grief appears before understanding fully forms. Fear emerges before the threat becomes visible. Ignored thoughts continue developing silently in the background. Then eventually they return stronger because awareness delayed confronting them directly. This is why silence can feel dangerous sometimes. Distraction suppresses thoughts temporarily, but silence gives unfinished mental processes room to rise again. Old memories return, unresolved fears return, existential questions return, and the longer they were avoided, the heavier they often feel. Perhaps because ignored thoughts accumulate emotional pressure over time. The mind resembles deep water in this way. Things pushed beneath the surface do not disappear, they remain waiting below. And eventually they rise again, sometimes unexpectedly. A random smell triggers forgotten grief. A quiet moment triggers existential panic. A simple sentence suddenly awakens a fear buried for years. The conscious self feels surprised, but deeper parts of the mind may have carried the thought continuously the entire time. This becomes deeply disturbing when applied to identity itself. How much of your behavior is shaped by thoughts you no longer consciously notice? Fears hidden so deeply they feel like personality. Beliefs absorbed so early they feel like reality itself. The mind builds entire emotional worlds from repeated unconscious thoughts, while awareness assumes it remains fully rational and self-directed. But perhaps humans are constantly being shaped by invisible mental processes continuing beneath ordinary consciousness, and maybe that explains why certain thoughts feel almost alive, not literally conscious, but persistent, adaptive, self-reinforcing, especially existential thoughts. Questions about death, meaning, loneliness, and reality rarely disappear completely once noticed deeply enough. They remain somewhere beneath awareness permanently, resurfacing during silence, exhaustion, heartbreak, or isolation. Not because the mind failed to solve them, but because some questions cannot be emotionally resolved fully. The thoughts continue because consciousness itself remains unfinished. Still, humans keep trying to escape uncomfortable thoughts through distraction, endless entertainment, endless noise, endless stimulation filling every quiet moment. Perhaps because silence reveals something terrifying. The mind never fully stops talking to itself, and some thoughts patiently wait years for the right moment to return. But there is another side to this paradox. Ignored thoughts often weaken once fully faced directly. Fear grows in avoidance, uncertainty grows in suppression. The mind exhausts itself fighting shadows it refuses to examine clearly. Sometimes the thought itself is not the real source of suffering, the resistance is. Yet this realization creates another unsettling question immediately afterward. If thoughts continue growing beneath awareness even when ignored, then how much of your inner life is unfolding without your permission right now? Perhaps entire emotional realities are forming silently inside the mind, while the conscious self remains unaware. Perhaps consciousness only notices the surface of processes already moving far deeper beneath it. And maybe the strangest part of all is this: some thoughts do not return because you failed to escape them. They return because part of you knows they were important enough to survive the silence. Ending that might never truly arrive. Human beings organize existence around endings. Stories end, days end, relationships end, lives end. The mind depends on conclusions because endings create structure. They allow reality to feel understandable, complete, emotionally contained. Without endings, existence would feel unfinished forever. But certain questions quietly destroy the idea of true endings entirely, and once noticed deeply enough, even death begins feeling stranger than before. Most people imagine endings as absolute disappearance, a final point where experience stops permanently. The mind cannot fully picture this, but emotionally it still treats endings as real and necessary. Yet the longer consciousness examines existence carefully, the more difficult true endings become to define. Take memory first. A person dies, yet parts of them continue existing inside other minds. Their voice remains in memory, their influence shapes future decisions, their existence ripples forward through people they touched. In a sense, fragments continue, not fully alive perhaps, but not completely gone either. Then consider matter itself. Every atom in your body existed long before you appeared. One day those atoms will continue existing after your death in different forms, endlessly moving through reality. Nothing truly disappears, it transforms. And suddenly endings begin looking less absolute than they once seemed. But the deepest disturbance comes from consciousness itself. No one has ever directly experienced non-existence. You can imagine darkness, silence, absence, but even those imaginings still happen inside awareness. The mind cannot step outside consciousness completely to understand what absolute ending would truly mean, and perhaps that limitation creates existential unease. Humans fear death intensely while simultaneously being unable to fully conceptualize it. The observer cannot imagine its own permanent absence clearly, which leads to a terrifying possibility. Maybe endings only exist from the perspective of those left behind. Think about sleep. Every night consciousness disappears temporarily, yet awareness returns so naturally that humans barely question the interruption. Hours vanish completely without subjective experience. Then consciousness resumes again, and perhaps that raises another unsettling question. How would you know if consciousness truly ended permanently? From inside experience, awareness either exists or nothing is experienced at all. There is never a direct experience of non-existence itself. This creates strange philosophical possibilities people rarely sit with comfortably. Some theories suggest consciousness may fundamentally emerge again wherever conditions allow awareness to exist. Others imagine time itself differently. Perhaps all moments remain permanently embedded within reality, meaning no experience truly vanishes from existence entirely. Even if these ideas are speculative, they reveal something important. The concept of a final ending becomes difficult to hold clearly under deep examination, and perhaps that is why humans obsess over legacy, memory, and permanence psychologically. The mind instinctively resists disappearance. People create art, families, ideas, histories, ways of extending themselves beyond biological endings, not necessarily because immortality is possible, but because consciousness struggles emotionally with finality. The disturbing part is that existence itself may already behave cyclically everywhere. Stars die and create new stars. Matter transforms endlessly. Nature repeats patterns continuously. Even human history moves through recurring emotional cycles: love, conflict, hope, fear, loss, rebirth. Reality rarely ends completely. It changes form, and maybe that makes personal existence feel stranger too. After all, who exactly is the you that fears ending? Your body changes continuously. Your thoughts change continuously. Your personality evolves constantly. Versions of yourself have already disappeared many times throughout life. The child you once were no longer exists fully. The teenager you once were vanished too. Yet awareness continued through those transformations somehow. Identity already behaves like a sequence of partial endings and rebirths. And perhaps death is not psychologically frightening merely because life ends, but because the mind cannot know what ending truly means for consciousness at all. This uncertainty creates existential tension impossible to resolve completely. Humans desperately want closure, final answers, clear endings, but reality repeatedly refuses simplicity. Even grief demonstrates this. People do not finish grieving completely. Loss changes shape over time, but emotional echoes continue existing indefinitely beneath awareness. Endings blur into continuation. The same happens with relationships. Memories persist, emotional patterns persist, influence persists. Nothing ends as cleanly as the mind wishes, and perhaps this extends to consciousness itself. Maybe existence cannot fully understand its own ending because awareness only knows experience from within continuity. The observer can witness change endlessly, but never directly witness its own total absence. That thought becomes especially eerie late at night. Somewhere in the future exists your final moment, your final thought, your final perception of reality. Yet from your perspective right now, consciousness continues feeling immediate and endless somehow. The present moment always feels alive, always feels ongoing, even while logic knows life is temporary, and perhaps that contradiction can never fully resolve emotionally. Still, humans continue searching for endings constantly, final truths, final peace, final certainty. But maybe existence itself does not operate through finality at all. Maybe humans invented endings psychologically because infinite continuation feels too overwhelming for the mind to process comfortably. After all, Even the universe may not possess a true ending in the way humans imagine. Some cosmological theories suggest endless expansion, others suggest cycles. Others suggest realities beyond observable limits entirely. Every answer creates another horizon behind it. Reality refuses closure, and perhaps that is why certain existential thoughts linger permanently once noticed. They never fully conclude. The mind keeps circling them endlessly, because some questions have no final edge where understanding simply stops. Instead, awareness continues moving deeper into mystery, and maybe the most unsettling possibility of all is this: the ending you fear may never truly arrive in the clear, absolute way the human mind expects. Perhaps existence only changes forms endlessly, while consciousness keeps searching for a conclusion reality was never built to provide. Awareness left alone. And now, after all these questions, after all these paradoxes, only one thing remains completely undeniable: awareness itself. Not certainty, not identity, not control, not even reality in the way you once assumed. Because every idea explored tonight eventually dissolved into uncertainty the longer it was examined. Thoughts became unstable, memory became unreliable, choice became questionable, the self became difficult to locate clearly. Yet through all of it, something remained present: awareness, silent, watching, always there beneath every changing experience. And perhaps that is the strangest truth hidden inside existence. Human beings spend their entire lives searching outward for answers, while the deepest mystery has been quietly observing everything from within all along. The observer. The awareness hearing these words right now. The presence that existed before every thought appeared and remains after every thought fades away. Most people rarely notice it because ordinary life keeps the mind distracted constantly. Endless noise, endless movement, endless identity. The world teaches people to focus on what awareness experiences rather than awareness itself. But silence changes that. Late at night, when distractions weaken, consciousness slowly begins noticing itself again, and in those moments, existence can feel deeply unsettling. Not because something is wrong, but because awareness suddenly realizes how mysterious it truly is. You are a conscious presence inside a universe that may never fully explain itself, a temporary observer questioning reality while being part of reality at the same time. And perhaps no answer will ever remove that mystery completely. Still, humans continue living, continue loving, continue searching. Maybe not because certainty exists, but because awareness itself cannot stop reaching toward meaning even inside uncertainty. And perhaps that reaching is what makes consciousness beautiful despite everything frightening hidden within it. The mind may never solve existence fully, but for a brief moment in the vast silence of reality, it became aware enough to ask questions at all. And maybe that is enough. So tonight, as the world grows quiet again, and your thoughts slowly begin drifting into silence, remember this strange possibility. You may never fully understand reality. You may never fully understand yourself, but awareness remains here regardless, watching the mystery unfold from within.